Welcome to the Federation for Children with Special Needs monthly session of Connecting Families. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Elizabeth Bostic, and I am here to facilitate today's meeting. We are really excited to have with us our very own Pat Cameron, who's going to be talking with us about summer accessible activities. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, if you're in need of translation interpretation services, the link for that is included in the chat through Wordly. We are using Wordly this evening. And also, we will be recording this session, so if you're having a particularly difficult bad hair day, then please turn off your camera. Once Pat is finished with her presentation, we will be monitoring chat, and depending on how many questions we have, we'll also entertain some live questions from the audience. We do know that there will be an opportunity to have your questions answered. So I think that is everything in terms of housekeeping. For those of you who don't know Pat, Pat has over 40 years of experience in early childhood education. Her focus has been on early childhood special education and young children's social emotional development. Prior to her current position, which is the Family Ties Director, Pat was the Senior Technical Assistant Specialist at the Center for Applied Research Solutions, providing training and technical assistance to states, tribes, and territories through SAMHSA's Project Launch Grants. She's also worked with the Mass Department of Early Education and Care as a 619 coordinator for preschool special education, as well as the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and Early Learning Services. So as you can tell just from that little snippet, there she comes with an amazing breadth of knowledge and expertise, in addition to, of course, being the parent of a child with special needs. So Pat, welcome, and tell us about accessible summer activities.
Well, thank you, Beth. And here's a side that you didn't know about me. I, for 18 years, was the accessibility consultant for the Unitarian Universalist Association and their annual conferences. So I come at this with lots of different experience on how to include people with disabilities, as well as in my past experiences with Rhode Island and their Race to the Top grant, was actually a playground inspector.
Wow.
And because they got tons of money to build playgrounds and so forth, and it was my job to make sure that they built them in an accessible way.
Right.
So I come to this more from my heart's passion than I do from any paid position that I have. And so I have a very short PowerPoint, and there are a lot of links and resources in there. And my colleague, Leslie, is very kindly agreed to be popping those in to the chat as we come upon them. So let me share my screen and we can get going from there.
A woman of many talents, my goodness.
So I got to move my toolbar out of their way to get to my slideshow. All right, can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
All right, terrific. So it is the time of year we need to be thinking about, and it's a little late for planning, but thinking about what our summer activities can be for our families. And so I just wanted a chance to be with you tonight to talk about how do we actually define accessibility. And there's a lot of debate about that. And then I have some examples of sites here in Massachusetts. And then I would love to open this up to a conversation where we can share some of the places that you may be aware of, and we can all grow richer for that experience. So when we define accessibility, it's not a one size fits all. And You know, there are some standard legal definitions of what's accessibility and what, you know, what makes something accessible, but everyone has their unique needs. And what works for one person may not work for another. And so while we say, you know, that a building is physically accessible, it may not work for a person who is blind. It may not work for someone who gets stimulated with, you know, fluorescent lights and, you know, and bells and whistles and, you know, noisy elevators and music playing in the background and so forth. So we really have to take a very personal and individual perspective when looking at how are public buildings accessible, how are outdoor spaces accessible, what about private buildings such as, you know, churches and houses of worship and so forth. And so you really have to go at this with your own goals in mind. What do you hope to achieve by choosing a playground, by choosing a beach, by choosing a trail or a path? Is it for the physical accessibility? Is it just for the ambiance and the experience of being outside in nature? You know, what is it that you're looking for? And so we'll talk about several opportunities with playgrounds and programs. And then think too about when you think about accessibility, there's, after we had the ADA and all the legal passages of laws and legislation, people came up with the notion of universal design. And it right now is a very architectural term when we think about, you know, universal design in developing buildings and thinking about convention spaces and schools. And it really is, how can everybody access it? So when you're thinking about, you know, the entrance into a building, if there are no stairs, you're eliminating some of those barriers. If you have winding paths and ramps where everybody accesses the building the same way, wide sliding doors that just, you know, automatically open as you approach, as opposed to looking for that one door perhaps that has a handicap button on it that you can push to allow somebody using a wheelchair to go through. So we're getting a little bit better. We've got a long way to go. And when we talk about our outdoor spaces, all of that is true as well. So this is one of my favorites, and this has been around for a very long time. And, you know, and when you think about schools and you've got the janitor there shoveling the stairs because you've got a handful of kids that want to get into the school, and, you know, and somebody says, you know, the young person in the wheelchair off to the side there says, could you please shovel the ramp? And the janitor's response was, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling, you know, them off, then I'll clear the ramp for you. And then of course the response is, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. And so it's, you know, when we think about our spaces and, you know, what works oftentimes for people with disabilities works for everyone. And so this is part of what we talk about when we think about universal design. How is it that we can set up our spaces so that it works for everyone? So let's get into some playgrounds. It wasn't until 2012, which doesn't seem that long ago to me, that playgrounds actually were required to be accessible. And again, think in mind of what you're looking at, because it could be physically accessible, but is it age appropriately accessible? You know, is the equipment too big and geared toward older children when you think about the age of your child? So again, it's not just the disability, it's age factor. And when you think about the surfacing on playgrounds, there are different kinds of surfaces available which actually pass accessibility code. You can have stone and you can have fiber, you know, chips or rubber chips, but navigating that on a, you know, with a wheelchair can be challenging. For the most talented wheelchair user. For a young child, it can be almost impossible. And so for many playgrounds, they're going with this pressed rubber or, padded surfacing. But if you look at the equipment, is it accessible for a child who is blind? Is it accessible for a child who is deaf? And so there are lots of features on a playground which include noise and includes different stimulus. And so it really is what you're looking for and what fits for your child. So again, they're doing good work. It's not a one size fits all. So again, it's checking things out and doing a little homework as far as finding out spaces. So this is one of the first resources that I want to share with you. And this actually was a project that the Department of Developmental Disabilities funded on All Kids Have the Right to Play Together. And this is a downloadable booklet that has, dozens of spaces here in Massachusetts, which talk about inclusive playgrounds here in Massachusetts. Most are geared towards young elementary age kids. And there are, the requirements within, to make a playground accessible is, can they access all of the equipment, not just some, but all of the equipment? Are there ramps going up to the different levels? Or if the child can transfer out of the wheelchair, are there transfer stations? Are they at the same level as a child in a wheelchair so that they can transfer from their chair onto the equipment? Swings particularly, and so forth. But to be able to transfer and be able to use all of the equipment. And then we want to think about beaches. And I just remember in one of the conferences that I was working with the UUA, and it was in Phoenix, Arizona, and their public witness event was out in the desert. And they kept saying, well, how am I going to get out to the desert? And I'm thinking, I can't make a desert accessible. Wheelchairs don't like sand. They don't travel well on sand. But that was years ago. Now, of course, they have beach wheelchairs, and we're going to show you some of that. And we're going to show you right in Arlington, where I live, they actually converted one of their beaches to be an accessible beach. And who knew they had beaches in Arlington? I didn't, but they do. And so these are mass.gov websites. So our state is taking all of this very seriously, and being able to make sure that people here in Massachusetts know how they can access accessible spaces. And so if you see the photo up in the top right corner, it shows a path down onto the sand, which is wide enough for someone who uses a wheelchair. But it takes maintenance. One good windstorm and that ramp is covered in sand. So again, the purpose is perfect. The upkeep is what's needed, and to make sure that, like the snow covering the ramp, there's somebody there to care for it, and there's somebody there who takes all of this very seriously. And so I invite you to go on this website to take a look. There are a number of accessible beaches here in Massachusetts. This happens to be off the Arlington News town website. And this is a picture of the accessible wheelchair. They have two of them, so that it's not a novel thing. They really want this to be something that the community can embrace and the community can use. They are free. And so just to give you an example of some of the progress that I think we're making here as a state, to be able to access some of these great spaces for your family. And at this particular beach, they have also accessible picnic tables, so that I was on the website earlier today. You can book kids' birthday parties here, and, and there's a whole reservation thing about using, the space. And so if you're in the market for outdoor fun activities for your child and their friends who may also use accessible equipment, this is a good possibility.
Now, James loved his Moby chair. We use those frequently.
Oh,
And
that's terrific.
they're fantastic chairs because they're great both for being on the sand, but also for floating in the water. You don't have to
Yes.
actually move from
You
it. And
don't have
so
to
that
transfer.
was
Yeah.
by far his favorite activity, was going to the beach because of that chair. He loved that.
Yeah. I mean, it just allows access,
Mhm.
as much as things are accessible, it's giving people access.
Yep.
And and the opportunity to participate. So here is another mass.gov website. The Department of Recreation and Conservation, or DCR, I think it is. They maintain a number of accessible trails all through, and there are so many that they're even divided on by the state regions and so forth that you can click on. Again, it's good to look at the detail. I know that up in Plum Island, there are wooden, probably 30 inches wide. So if you're using a wheelchair and you come upon somebody using a wheelchair coming in the opposite direction, you're kind of in a mess because there's no place to park and pass and so forth. So, like, again, it's worth checking out. It may be worth doing a scout out visit first to make sure that it has everything you need. But there are some just wonderful spaces to enjoy the outdoors here in Massachusetts. So the Federation puts out a book every summer and on Summer Fun, listing a multitude of summer camps and activities. But what I want to highlight for you here is this print on the right side, which is way too small, but the link is there for you to access the guide. But it really has some wonderful suggestions on how to sort of screen a camp, or the questions to ask, or the things to look for, so that you can make sure that you're making a choice that best meets your son or daughter's needs, your family members' needs. And so I wanted to put it up there. We update this annually. It's typically posted on the Federation's website. Perfect time would be January, February. It's usually up by March. But because families are making camp plans in the winter and making those reservations and so forth. But it's a wonderful guide. And like I said, these tips on the side here on page 3 of the guide are just terrific resources to have. And here's some other resources that you may or may not be familiar with. The Boston Parent Paper, which is a free publication here in Massachusetts, also lists, this was their March edition, also lists camps and summer programs. And these are inclusive camps and experiences. These are not all recreational. Some of these are very, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and some are drama and the performing arts and so forth. But they have a nice publication that they put out. And this, again, is free. We happen to receive it here at the Federation, and you can have it mailed to your home. You can access it online, but they do an annual camp and summer program edition as well. And then here's just a little tip that I don't know if you're aware of. People with disabilities are eligible to get a free lifetime access pass to our national forests and parks. And so you can apply. They do ask that you come in person, but there's an office right in Boston, and you can visit any of the parks and and ask about a free access pass. It's for that person, and I think it's one other person. So if you're traveling with someone and a family, you can get free access to the national state forests and parks. And then I just wanted to feature a few things that if you're traveling and out and about, some of the national parks are doing a real good intentional effort to make programs accessible. At Yosemite, this particular program really takes a look at, they have a junior ranger program that any children between 4 and 12 years old can access. And the accessible part is they've really made the materials accessible. They've made the materials accessible by size, by print, and many of the activities have less, for a child perhaps with autism, they're less stimulating. And so they've done a really nice job in providing those accommodations. And I just really, at this point, want to open it up to have a conversation about what you may have discovered, what questions you may have. And so I'm going to stop sharing at this point and just open it up to what you are thinking about, what questions you may have, what resources you're aware of that we can share. Because as best as I do, parents to parents are the best resources. What one parent knows can share it with another parent and their lives are enriched.
It's there's another organization, smilemass.org. Lottie, who's has a son with a disability, and she's been working to make sure that beaches have access to those Moby chairs. So every year she actually donates about 20 chairs across the state of Massachusetts. And she's always fundraising to do that, along with having other adaptive equipment for families. So if you go to her website or to smilemass.org, you'll see a list of the beaches that those chairs are actually located at. So we ended up, because this was, how it is when you're looking at adaptive equipment, you're never entirely sure how much you're going to use it, right? But it was because we had the opportunity to try that we discovered this was one that James would absolutely use. And we used it. And so we bought our own. We got our own as a result, and she was able to help us to find the vendor to do that. But it's just a great way to know that you don't have to have the equipment all the time. There are places that actually has it available. And there are a couple of places around the state that actually have similar types of programs. So it's amazing. Sometimes you find that you don't actually have to have the equipment. There are places that will actually supply it for you. First come, first serve. So you want to get there early, but you can do it.
Thank you, Beth.
Victoria asked a question about, she said in Rhode Island, you have to be income eligible to get state park passes. Is that the case nationally as well?
It's an interesting question, because here in Massachusetts, there's a couple of ways to access that. There's the disability pass, which is free. And that's based on a doctor's note of the person having a disability. I know that during COVID, my daughter and I joined the Audubon Society here in Massachusetts, and finding out through that you can have an EBT card, your food stamp card, and it gets you 4 people into the Audubon sites. And so there are ways to access from a financial piece of that as well.
Cambria was just talking about a program that I'm aware of as well. My kids used to love to go to this too. Was the Boston Children's Museum has a Morningstar Access program. So children with special needs and medical needs in the community have a visit. They can actually visit the museum where there's only a few visitors. So they'll actually have certain hours specific for those children. And so it's not running rampant with everybody else at the same time. So it's quieter. And at the same time, people can actually access it. So it's a great program that people should check out because it does give people access to normal things, right? And that's what's really important to families.
And I know, go ahead, Cambria.
I was going to say something that I think is nice they're doing right now is they have some days that are masks only. So families who have kids with, that are maybe immunocompromised or whatever, everyone has to be masked on those certain times. And then there are others where they're mask optional. So I think that's a nice addition.
Nice. And I see Jules has had the opportunity to try that program too, and it worked well for them. Yes. Maya, I don't know if that's Maya or Maja. Their son just started a camp at the South Shore SNAP, and it's been great. And they run programs, and they always guarantee a one-to-one for someone who needs it. That's fantastic.
And thank
Maya,
you for
thank you.
including the link. That's great.
Awesome.
I know Boston School of Ballet, or Boston Ballet, for the Nutcracker, opens up their last dress rehearsal right at Thanksgiving time for students with disabilities. Oftentimes schools will plan field trips. I know when my daughter took dance at the Boston School of Ballet, it was free access. And they brought the performers out so that the kids could meet them and touch their outfits, and those ballerinas with their petticoats and tutus that go
Yes.
straight out like an arrow. And so it was terrific, and a little intimidating when you see the rats and some of the people in their costumes, but oftentimes, and I know that many movie theaters now will run movies with the lights on for kids who can't tolerate being in the dark. So there's a lot of things that are being done to accommodate different kids with different needs.
Yeah, Karen actually pointed out something that I had experienced too. In Massachusetts state parks, access is free with a handicap placard. It's absolutely true. Did it all the time with James. We were like, which park are we going to today? So that's always helpful. And Barbara is in need of some help trying to find the camp for her grandchildren. So we'll see if we can find someone to help you with that. As Pat said, it's late in the summer to find open places, but you never know.
Right.
You don't know until you try. So, but yes, Pat, you were talking about accessible movie theaters. Very often, if you just go to their website, they will tell you which shows are specific for kids with disabilities and are sensory friendly. And what's been happening more frequently, which is really wonderful, is when summer vacations come up, or when April vacation or these school vacations, they tend to have those shows more frequently because they're aware of the fact that kids are home. Parents are going to lose their minds if they don't get their kids out of the house. So you'll find that those things happen more often. And the other place that this is happening is when you're seeing musical theater productions. Community theaters and local theater companies are also creating spaces where they have sensory friendly theater productions as well, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely. I think the Museum of Science does a sensory night as well.
Yeah. And the Discovery Museum in Acton has the Especially for Me event series, dedicated hours and free admission for families with disabilities. There's a link in the chat for anyone who would like to take advantage of that. It really is fascinating when you've been a parent for as long as you and I have, Pat, which we won't talk about the many digits that are behind that. But I've seen such a change even in the last 5 or 10 years. But things are so different. When James was born, there weren't many accessible playgrounds. I actually worked with our town to have one put in one of our elementary school yards in order to make that happen. The fact that it's now a requirement is a wonderful thing, but I can literally remember back in the day when it wasn't required. And many of those playgrounds also, we were somewhat of a trailblazer in thinking not only of the physical access, but of communication access. And so now it's becoming more common that you see communication boards at these playgrounds so that children who are nonverbal or who may be dysregulated and can't use their words can point to something and tell you that they fell, or that they need to go to the bathroom, or that they want to play with someone. So people are really getting much better at thinking about the many ways that access needs to take place for children, which is wonderful.
Well, one of the things the Audubon Society has done as well is they have guided tours. So for somebody who is blind, you can get a headset and it talks you through the tour, and and gives you the information of what the fauna, the plants are and the animals and sounds that they may be hearing and, you know, and so forth, just like they do with the art museums. You know, they have those different walking tours.
Very cool.
Other questions that people have, or, you know, something that you've discovered that you would like to share? Oh, Leslie's got one for accessible pools and spray decks. Spray decks are so popular for kids with young kids.
Well, the
I
Rose
call them
Kennedy,
splash pads, but
yeah,
Yeah,
the Rose Kennedy Parkway has one over by Faneuil Hall where they have the sprinklers that come up. And that was another favorite activity that James used to love, being pushed through that. You know, so those kinds of things they're another place where, you know, anybody can use it.
yeah. Cambria's got the Berkeley School has an adaptive music camp for kids with disabilities, and that was actually listed in the Boston Parent paper as well. Other questions? Because I really was hoping this could be a conversation. And, you know, and so, you know, feel free to unmute and chime in. And we're not a terribly big group, but.
Yeah. Sometimes small groups are the best.
Hi, this is Lisa Himmelman.
Hi.
Hi, Lisa.
I hope you don't mind if I just sort of jump in here. So I find I'm really struggling. I have a 4.5-year-old son who has autism, and my husband and I work full time, and we're really struggling to find activities for my son that we can do with him on the weekends. That would accommodate, you know, working parent schedule, but would also accommodate a child with his special needs, who also is not school aged yet. I feel like all three of those have been barriers for us, in terms of, you know, not even just during the summer, but just generally. We live in Bedford, and you know, I feel like, and we were in Arlington before this, and I feel like we've always kind of struggled with that. So I don't know if you all or anyone else on the call might have some intel or suggestions for us of places that we could look into, but I would appreciate it.
Well, I can't say enough good things about the Audubon Society. You know, Drumlin Farm is right in Lincoln, right next to Bedford, and so it's very close to you. It's a very hands-on experience for kids, and, you know, and they've got animals, they've got a playground, they have all kinds of, you know, spaces that, and things that kids can climb on, and, you know, and so, you know, there's wide open spaces and you know, and very small spaces. And so it's got a nice variety of spaces. The other place out towards Worcester is, oh, the name is escaping me. It begins with a B, and I'm sorry, but it's in, if you look, you know, on Audubon Society webpage, Broadmeadow, thank you. And they have trails, it's hilly, and, you know, so you need a little stamina, but they've got great play spaces, which are built right into, you know, using tree logs and, you know, in sort of a very natural environment, as well as they've got frog ponds and, you know, and things to look for wildlife. They're supposed to have a butterfly season. I have yet to get there in time for the butterflies, but there's supposed to be a weekend that specializes. I know Rebecca put in the thing about Davis Farmland in Sterling. It's another great spot with, you know, animals and petting zoos, and great for young kids, and, you know, and being able to, in fact, they actually really target that younger family, and, you know, participation. Somebody told me once, as adults, they tried to go and it was like, no, we're here for families. And it was like, interesting.
Yeah, what's the zoo that does that as well? Oh God, it's out in Sterling.
Southwick Animal Farm.
Southwick
Yeah.
Animal Farm. They will only do children as well. Somebody else also mentioned the community boating program. I know another program that works that's really awesome is Piers Park Sailing.
Mhm.
They work specifically with folks who have children with disabilities of all ages, and have adaptive equipment. And you do have to sign up for that. You can't just show up for it, but you can sign up for week-long blocks. And they're right in East Boston. Very easy. And Rebecca put in another great resource. MAC, which is Moms of Amazing Kids, is a Facebook page, and often families there will exchange information about places that they know that will work well. They're a fantastic resource. Yeah. And then Faith is mentioning Codman Farm, which is in Lincoln. You can volunteer as a family or just walk freely. The other thing that going back to the state parks, the other place that I like to go, Pat, often is botanical gardens.
Yes.
Because there's something about botanical gardens that in general are just very calming. And even if there are a lot of people there, because it's a walking path, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of people there. So, and anybody of any age can go there. You may not want to travel this distance, but in Maine, the botanical gardens have these wonderful, huge wooden structures of different, I think they're called trolls. But there's like 7 of them that are massive, made by this guy who does it. But in the middle of it is a place for children to make, it's a fairy farm. So you could make little houses using the various twigs and things there. So it's a great little individual activity. But again, because it's so open and spread out, it doesn't seem as overwhelming for a child on the spectrum. So that might be something to consider too.
Yeah, and I mean, just in Jamaica Plain, you've got the Arboretum. I mean, we go there so often on a Sunday morning with our breakfast and have a picnic. And it's free, and you can just meander through the gardens. You're right, Beth. I mean, they have the wide walkways, and and even if parking seems to be a challenge, you still get in there and it's like, where is everybody?
Yes.
Because it's all so spread out. But any of the botanical gardens is a wonderful suggestion. There's a terrific Heritage Park down on Cape Cod is just gorgeous. It's pricey to get in, but it's just another wonderful, wonderful place. And they have waterfalls and sculptures and all kinds of things. And they do have an accessible tram that can take you if navigating all the walkways is too difficult or tiring.
And there are a couple of other resources. Lisa, you have not because you asked not, right? Now you're being inundated. So I really do hope that some of these resources will be helpful to you as a family. And I always kind of stress the name of the sailing place is Piers Park Sailing. But just stressing, looking for things that are in our own communities. There are so many things that really are available to all of us. And I think often we don't think of them just because we're so busy being in the trenches every day, we don't look up. So those very natural places that other people use all the time, we can use too. We just have
check
to
your own town's website,
Yeah.
their park department and so forth. When I was on the Arlington one, in preparation of this, I mean, I happened to find out about the wheelchairs through a newsletter that I got. So I did a little bit more digging to get pictures and that kind of thing. But you could check your own town city website for the park departments and, in which playgrounds are accessible. And since 2012, any new playground, any new renovations and so forth, they've had to make them accessible. So I know there's a question about movie theaters and theater performances. I know that some of the plays in Boston, particularly geared towards children, like Aladdin is playing right now, they will oftentimes have occasions where they do a toned down version so that it's not so overstimulating for kids. Rebecca, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm putting something in. Oh.
Yeah, I'll mute.
There's
We're sitting right next to each other.
Yeah, I'll mute.
the Open Door Theater in Acton is a completely accessible theater. And not only in terms of accessing for participants, but even for folks whose children may be interested in performing. So that's one that would be really helpful for people to look into.
I was just going to say that if you have the time for a weekend to go up to the main botanical gardens, I just wanted to give that an extra thumbs up. They have trolls now.
Yes.
Ginormous trolls.
Yes.
And it is accessible. I pushed my daughter in her stroller. It's a little bit of a hike, but oh, it was just the most magical weekend. And I've got a really complicated kid, so it was so worth it. And then I'm also going to put in the chat here the email of a gentleman named Paul Ward, who runs the adapted sports programming at Franciscan Children's. They have a couple of summer camps that you can find out about. They're like half-day summer camps, and it's for kids of all abilities. And then they also have fall stuff. They have swimming. They have track. I believe it's free or very small. Okay, sorry. Anyway, or very small cost. So I'm going to put that in the chat.
Yeah, I mean the trolls, and there's the trolls come also with a little game, so kids if they're wanting to, it's almost like a treasure hunt, right? So you can either just go and find them, or if you want to actually participate in the game, you can do that too. But they're huge, and each one has a name and a story behind them, so it makes for a very interactive experience.
Fun. Yeah, we can definitely save the chat. Jessica asked if we could send out these resources. You have the opportunity, you can save the chat yourself. If you're on a device, click those three little buttons next to the smiley face at the bottom, and it will say save chat. But we can also send it out for those who have registered. I think we have your email addresses.
Oh, I love me some Paul Ward. Paul was a Lend student last year. Yeah, he's fantastic. And he himself is in a wheelchair, so he comes from true life experience. He's amazing. He really is. He had some amazing parents too. Kids in Sports in Walpole is very accepting of Maya's autistic son, which is wonderful. Yeah. Any advocacy language we can use to ask local rec department to ask for inclusion of our kids, or any advice from people who have successfully done it. You know, I find that very often the issue is not a lack of willingness as much as not knowing how.
Yeah.
And so the challenge, of course, and this is something that we parents face every day. We're forever educating. We never seem to get off of that job. So I find that there is much more success when you can not only state what the problem is, but provide a couple of options for solutions, right? So what my child needs is X for these reasons, and help them to see it. And then also participate with them around fundraising opportunities or grants that are available to make that happen. So there have been many a parent who have done that in the past, where they've approached them and said, we want to partner with you in figuring out how to make this happen. What I have found is if you just go and say, you have to do this, that comes with lots of resistance.
Although I will say sometimes that works too, you know, because I think in people's lack of understanding and lack of experience, I think oftentimes presents itself as resistance. And so, you know, I have with my own daughter pushed the envelope a little bit in the past, particularly when she was a teenager, and looking for volunteer opportunities, and saying, you know, you haven't met her yet. Why are you saying no? And, you know, and providing opportunities for them to get to know somebody, you know, more than just an initial interview or something, but to be able to, you know, have an opportunity to get to know somebody. We participated in Operation House Call for years and years and years in getting, you know, doctors in training during their pediatric round to come to our home and learn more about what it's like to parent a child with a disability. And, you know, and many of their questions were out of just lack of exposure and lack of experience. And so, you really have to be sort of in that groove that says, I'm just going to take it upon myself to educate the next generation.
Yep.
Whether it's the next generation of healthcare providers or the next generation of teachers, which are what your camp counselors are potentially, are
Yep.
those the next generation of teachers, and so forth. And it does pay off. It really, really does.
And partnerships with other parents pay off, right? So one of the
Oh, yeah.
suggestions that Leslie put in is around approaching your local CPAC. There is definite strength in numbers. If you're going by yourself, you may have to push a whole lot, you're pushing that rock uphill by yourself. But if you're actually working with several other parents, very often that gets people's attention, right? And they see the feasibility of it. And they also recognize like, oh, this is not an isolated thing. There might actually be more out there that are not getting what they need. And, we want to be the ones who actually do the right thing. So anytime you can partner with some other folks, it's always easier in the long run. And you can leverage all the various strengths of other people. So, if you're not the marketing person, somebody else is, lean on. Rebecca, you have your hand raised. And you're muted. Still muted. Rebecca, you're muted.
Yes, sorry, I'm sitting behind Pat, so we're trying to figure this out. I should just not speak. Two things about that, the advocacy language. My daughter's 17, and so we've been doing this for 17 years, and it is exhausting. And sometimes you have to decide, I don't know if I can fight this battle. Or I don't know that I can build this program right now. And I think that's just the reality. I asked our local Y recently if they could help me with Eliza so I could go to the gym, and they just went, oh, we can't do that. We've talked about it. And I just thought, okay, I could use this as a learning lesson, but boy, I'm tired. So I'm going to maybe not take this one on right now.
Right.
But I would suggest that if you want to approach your local rec department and you aren't feeling like I'm going to take this one on full force, that you could find a couple of precedents, or you find a couple of other cities that do have it. And you could just say, look, this exists here and here. So why doesn't it exist here? I mean, something like that is even a small way of just a nudge without you having to, organize the troops or whatever. So sometimes you just don't have all of the energy to do everything. So that's just a thought.
Yeah, no, it's a great suggestion, Rebecca. And I think, what I would add to that is when you say it exists here and here, give them contact information so that they have someone to talk to. Because again, they need, it's helpful to talk to another peer who's doing it and can tell them what's working well, what doesn't work well, what, how the how-to is often the barrier. People look at our kids and they get nervous. They don't know what to do. So if we can give them anybody who can help them with some real examples on how they've done it, then they can adapt to that environment. That would be helpful too. Anybody
Other
else?
thoughts and questions?
Easter Seals is now running the Bridge Center, which is fully accessible, 22 acres of campus. Wow, for year-round recreation. Nice. Thank you for that. You're welcome, Jesse. Always happy to help.
We're all still at work, and we're just sitting all right next to each other so we can hear everybody's sidebar. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Tabitha. You have a great night too. Thanks for joining us. Any other thoughts or recommendations? You're welcome, Maya. Our pleasure. Like Pat said, parents are your best resource. Why reinvent the wheel?
Absolutely.
Well, if there aren't any other comments or recommendations, accolades, praise, cash. No, just kidding. Then we can probably wrap this evening up.